The velvet prison. Playing dead was the only way to see my children's true faces, paralyzed in the ICU with a breathing tube down my throat. I heard my own son whisper that the cheapest option was to pull the plug. As my daughter-in-law nodded, he slid my late husband's silver bracelet off my wrist to pawn it. They thought I was completely gone. Little did they know I heard every single word, and I'm about to turn their greedy world upside down. My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old. And that was the moment I understood that dying is not nearly as frightening as watching the people who came from your own body count the money before you're even gone. Sit with me for this one. It is not a story that ends the way they wanted it to, and I promise you, the ending is worth the wait. To comprehend how a mother ends up immobilized, listening to her children orchestrate her funeral like a corporate merger, we must return to the beginning. For years, the residents of my old quarter have written me off as an eccentric, senile recluse. Home is a dilapidated, two-story wooden house, capped with weathered tiles, a relic of a bygone era, swallowed by wild weeds. Local gossip paints me as a woman abandoned by her children, whose rare appearances coincide solely with ancestral death anniversaries or desperate pleas for cash. On that last point, the rumors aren't mistaken. Observing my habits, hoarding shards of broken glass, stacking decades-old newspapers, and spending twilight hours stationary on the porch. The neighborhood concluded my sanity had unraveled. In their eyes, I am merely a miserly, peculiar widow clinging to a collapsing structure, as if it were the sole treasure of a desolate existence. Their judgment is welcome. What eluded them all, and what my children would have dismissed with arrogant laughter, is that while society operates by one paradigm, my life has been governed by an entirely different ledger. Far from being a bewildered elder, desperately holding on to a worthless property, I was merely a strategist biding my time, waiting for the perfect catalyst. And it was approaching with terrifying speed. But sequencing matters. Before revealing the trap, the events leading to that hospital bed, and the paralysis that lifted veil on my family's true nature, must be told. It happened on an ordinary evening. I was clearing the dinner table, the same table where I'd fed my children 10,000 meals when they were small, and something went wrong inside my head. A sudden darkness, a roaring, and then the floor coming up to meet me. A stroke. A mild cerebral hemorrhage, they'd call it later. I collapsed right there beside the table, and I did not get up. It began on an unremarkable evening. While clearing the dinner table, the very surface where countless childhood meals had been served, a sudden catastrophic failure occurred within my skull. A blinding darkness, a deafening roar, and then the floor rushed upward. A stroke, or a mild cerebral hemorrhage, as the clinical charts would later classify it. Collapsing right beside the wood, I went down, and the darkness took over. They were egregiously mistaken about the coma. Rather than drifting in oblivion, I found myself violently localized within the confines of my own anatomy, utterly conscious, yet permanently pinned behind eyelids that defied my every command to open. This velvet prison, a state of profound immobility that onlookers readily misdiagnosed as brain death, inadvertently became the catalyst for a grim epiphany. It stripped away the curated illusions of those I had held most dear. For when a person is presumed deaf, mute, and entirely insensate, the social theater ceases. The masks are discarded, leaving you to witness the unvarnished, chilling truth of who they are when they believe you have already crossed the threshold. The first to breach my silent sanctuary were my eldest son and his wife. In the heavy gloom of my consciousness, Their arrival struck a deeply ironic chord. For the better part of a decade, my firstborn had operated as the quintessential paragon of corporate busyness, perpetually unavailable to call, let alone visit the mother, who had systematically starved her own desires so that he might thrive. Yet, by some dark miracle, his calendar had suddenly cleared. The illusion of filial piety shattered within minutes of their entry. They had not journeyed hither to cradle my hand or whisper a tender farewell. They were there to pillage. Are you absolutely certain she didn't leave the paperwork in the master bedroom? Eleanor's voice, sharp and transactional, cut through the hum of the cardiac monitor. Positive, my son replied, his footsteps heavy as he paced the linoleum floor. I ransacked her desk last night. It has to be in the house somewhere. If we don't locate the deed before the state gets involved, the probate process will tie up the property for months. Well, check her purse again, Eleanor hissed. And keep your voice down. The nurses are hovering near the station. Lying there, I was forced to listen to them audit my mortality. It was not their mother they had rushed to see, but a coveted piece of paper. I want you to understand what that did to me, lying there. Because I need you to understand who these children were before they became this, so that you feel the full weight of what I heard. I raised 3 children, mostly alone. My husband, Edmund, was a good man, but he passed young, and I buried him when the children were still small, and after that, it was just me. I worked every job a woman could find in those years. I took in sewing at night until my eyes burned. I sold what I could at the market before dawn. I wore the same 2 dresses for a decade so that they could have shoes that fit. There were winters, I told my children, I wasn't hungry. And it was a lie because there was only enough for 3 plates, and I was not going to be one of them. That was the arithmetic of motherhood as I understood it. You subtract yourself, quietly, again and again, so the children can add up to something. And they did add up to something. Or so I thought. My eldest son grew into a man with a good job and a fine house, and that gold-ringed wife. My daughter married well and moved across the city into a life of comfortable things. I was proud. I told myself I had done it, that the sacrifices had worked, that I had raised good people who would carry kindness forward into the world. I did not notice, or did not let myself notice, how the visits grew shorter and rarer, how the phone calls came only when something was needed, how I had slowly become, to my own children, less of a mother and more of an obligation, a name on a list, an old house that might one day be worth something. There was a 3rd child, my youngest son. He was the gentlest of the 3, and he married a girl named Lan, a poor girl, kind, with nothing to her name but a good heart. The family never approved. And when my youngest son died, far too young, a grief I still cannot speak of, the family did something I am ashamed of to this day. They cast Lan out. They told her she was poor, that she had failed to give the family a grandson, that she had no more claim on any of us. They pushed her out of the family 3 years ago and told her never to come back. And I, weak and grieving and outvoted, let it happen. Remember Lan. She matters more than anyone in this story. So that was my family, gathered around my hospital bed. Or rather, not gathered. 2 of them circling, like the deed to a house was a carcass. And the 3rd cast out years ago and gone. And I lay there in my locked and silent body. And I listened to the truth come out. I heard my eldest son say that the old house would fetch a good price if they sold it, enough to split cleanly between him and his sister. I heard them do the math, out loud, over my breathing body. I heard my daughter worry that the hospital bills were eating into that sum, and I heard my son offer his solution. In that calm and reasonable voice I had once loved to hear as a boy. The doctors said the prognosis was bad, he said. The breathing machine was expensive. Perhaps it would be kinder. He actually used the word kinder to simply have it removed, to let nature take its course and stop the money from draining away. My own son, discussing the cost of the air I was breathing and finding it too high. And my daughter-in-law, the one with the gold ring, had her own contribution. Why keep me in an expensive city hospital? At all, she wondered aloud, when there were cheap nursing homes out in the province that would take an old woman off their hands for almost nothing. A win-win, she called it. I would be somewhere. They would be free. The house money would stay whole. I lay there and I felt each word land like a blade. But do you know which moment truly broke me? It was not the talk of the breathing tube. It was not the nursing home. It was the bracelet. I have worn a thin silver bracelet on my wrist for over 40 years. It is not worth much. Edmund gave it to me when we had almost nothing, saving up in secret for months to buy it. And I have not taken it off since the day he died. It is the last warm thing his hands ever touched to my skin. And as I lay there, unable to move, I felt my eldest son gently, carefully, slide it off my wrist. For a moment, God forgive me, for a moment I thought it was tenderness. I thought my boy was holding his mother's hand. And then I heard him tell the others he'd taken it to help with the hospital costs. I found out later there were no hospital costs it went toward. He took his dead father's last gift to his mother, and he traded it at a gold shop, and he bought his wife a new ring with it. He turned my husband's love into a bauble for the woman who wanted me shipped to the province. That was the moment the last piece of the mother in me went quiet, and something clearer and colder woke up in her place. Not rage. I want to be honest with you. It was not rage. It was a terrible, clean understanding. The filial devotion I had believed in my whole life, the good children I had starved myself to raise, all of it had been a performance, and I had simply never been in the room when the mask was off. Now I was. I had a front row seat to the truth, and the price of the ticket was pretending to be dead. Here is the thing I kept thinking, in my dark and silent body. When my eldest son was a little boy, he was terrified of the dark. He'd wake in the night, certain that something was wrong, certain that I had left him, and I would come in and sit on the edge of his bed and take his small hand, and I would say the same words every time until he could sleep again. Mom is awake now. You don't have to worry anymore. That was our ritual, his and mine, for years. Those words were how I taught my frightened boy that his mother would always wake up, would always be there, would never leave him in the dark. I held on to that memory in the intensive care unit like a stone in my fist, because I had a feeling I was going to need those words again before this was over. And I did. But not in any way that little boy could ever have imagined. For now, though, I was still trapped, still silent, still listening. And while my two children circled the money, something else was happening in that hospital room, something so quiet I almost missed it. A pair of rough, warm hands had begun to care for me, and they belonged to the last person on earth who had any reason to come. It was Lan, my cast-out daughter-in-law. The poor girl the family had thrown away 3 years ago, who had no blood tie to me, no legal claim on anything, no reason on earth to come, and who was, somehow, there. She had heard I was in the hospital, and she had come, and she had simply stayed. I could not see her, but I knew her by her hands. They were rough, working hands, the hands of a woman who had scrubbed floors and carried loads her whole life. And they were the gentlest things that touched me in that entire hospital. While my own children searched for the deed to my house, Lan sat by my bed and wiped the sweat from my forehead, one patient stroke at a time. She massaged my feet so they wouldn't ache from lying still. She talked to me in a low, warm voice, not knowing if I could hear, telling me to hold on, please, just hold on. And once, when she thought no one was listening, I heard her whisper a prayer, that if only her mother would wake up, she would sell her own blood to pay for the care. She would find a way, only please let her live. She called me her mother. The family had stripped her of that name 3 years ago. She had never stopped using it. There is one night I will carry with me until my own last breath. It was late, the ward gone quiet, my children long since departed to their comfortable homes, and I heard Lan, at my bedside, unwrap something and begin to eat, quietly, sparingly, the way the poor eat. It was a single plain bread roll. I understood, listening, that it was likely all she had eaten all day, that she was spending what little money she had on the bus fare to come sit with a woman who could give her nothing. And then she stopped. She set it down, and I heard her tear it, and I felt her lean close, and she pressed a small, soft piece of that bread against my lips, whispering that I had to keep my strength up, that mother had to eat something too. She was giving half of her only meal to a body that couldn't even swallow it. My own son had taken the bracelet off my dying wrist to buy his wife a ring. And this girl the family had thrown into the street was feeding me half her last piece of bread in the dark. I have turned those two images over in my mind 1,000 times since, side by side, and they tell you everything you will ever need to know about what family actually is. She never spoke of the money I supposedly didn't have. She never asked about the house or a will or what might be left when I was gone. In 2 weeks, she asked me for nothing except to live. Do you understand how rare that is? To have a person want you, only you, the tired old breathing fact of you, with no arithmetic attached. I had raised 2 children on a lifetime of sacrifice and received an invoice. I had been kind to one poor girl years ago before the family cast her out and received a devotion that shamed the whole world. And here is the detail that shattered me completely, lying there in the dark. Lan knew nothing. She had no idea about any inheritance, any house, any money. She had been cast out precisely because she had nothing and could offer nothing. There was not one single thing for her to gain by sitting at my bedside. My biological children, who stood to inherit everything, could not be bothered to hold my hand. They were on their phones with real estate agents. And this poor, discarded girl, who stood to gain absolutely nothing, would not leave my side and prayed to sell her blood for me. The contrast was so total, so absolute, that it burned away every idea I had ever held about what family means and who your real children are. Because your real children, I learned in that room, are not always the ones who came from your body. Sometimes they are the ones who choose to hold your hand when there is nothing in it for them to take. Now, let me tell you the secret. The thing I knew that they did not. The reason a strange old woman had been sitting so patiently on her porch, watching the sun go down, waiting for the right moment. That falling down wooden house that my children were so eager to sell for a quick, clean split. That house they despised, with its weeds and its old tiles and its stink of an old woman's poverty, was not worthless. It sat at the exact center of the city's new International Pedestrian Boulevard project. The plans had been drawn, clearance had been approved, and the compensations that each would pay for my little plot of land was not the modest sums my children were calculating over my breathing body. It was roughly 30 times the market value they imagined. A fortune, a genuine fortune, the kind that changes the shape of a family for generations. The approval had been signed a month before my stroke. The official document, the one that proved what my land was truly worth, sat in a secure vault at the bank, and I was the only living person who held the key and knew it was there. Not my son, not my daughter, not their agents or their lawyers. Me, the senile old woman collecting broken glass on her porch. I had known for a month that I was, on paper, about to become wealthy beyond anything my children had ever guessed, and I had no one. Not out of cunning, at first. I simply hadn't decided what to do with it, and I wanted to see, quietly, how my family treated a poor old mother before they knew there was anything to gain. I wanted to know who loved Margaret and who loved the house. I had thought it would take years to find out. It took 4 days. 4 days of lying still in a hospital bed with my eyes closed answered the question more completely than 4 decades of being their mother ever had. My biological children, who believed I had nothing but a shack, were ready to pull the plug and ship me to the province to save a few coins. My cast-out daughter-in-law, who also believed I had nothing, sat and prayed to sell her blood for me. Neither of them was performing for an inheritance because neither of them knew there was one. Which means what I saw in that room was the pure, unmasked truth of each of their hearts. Money hadn't corrupted anyone's behavior in that room. Money was absent from everyone's knowledge. I was simply, finally, seeing them exactly as they were. And what I saw made my decision for me. Though I still had to survive long enough to make it. Because my children, it turned out, were not content to wait for nature. They had a faster plan. It was Lan, in the end, who cracked the whole thing open, and she did it by accident, out of nothing but love. On the 14th day of my silence, Lan was tidying the few belongings that had come with me to the hospital, and, in the pocket of my old jacket, she found a folded slip of paper, a receipt, a special tax payment receipt tied to the land. She didn't understand what it was, but Lan, unlike my children, was the kind of person who asked questions when she didn't understand something. Instead of simply calculating what it was worth, she mentioned it to a friend of hers who happened to work in the land administration office just to ask what it meant. And her friend looked into it, and the truth of the golden land came out. Not to my greedy children, who had the most to gain, but to the one person who had never once thought to look for a gain. And it came out at the worst possible moment, which is to say the most perfect one. Because on that same 14th day, my 2 biological children arrived at the hospital with a lawyer and a folder full of papers, and they were done waiting. They had already signed a contract to sell my house, my priceless house, for a pittance to some intermediary, not knowing what they were throwing away. And now they had come to complete the last piece of their plan. The papers the lawyer carried were for a competency proceeding. They intended to have me declared mentally unfit, a coma patient beyond recovery, so that they could seize control of my assets and my rights while I still drew breath. They needed my thumbprint on a document surrendering everything, and they had brought a lawyer willing to guide an unconscious woman's hand to the ink. I lay there and I felt them lift my limp hand. I felt the lawyer position my thumb over the agreement that would strip me of everything I was and everything I owned. My children stood around me, impatient, certain, waiting for it to be done. And I decided that I had heard enough. I want to tell you that the strength came from God, or from rage, or from some medical miracle. The truth is simpler. I had been able to move for 2 days already. The feeling had crept back into my body slowly, and I had hidden it, lying still, waiting, because some deep instinct told me the full truth had not finished revealing itself. I had been playing dead a little longer than my body required, because the dead hear everything. And now, with my thumb hovering over the paper that would erase me, the moment I had been waiting my whole patient life for had finally, exactly, arrived. I opened my eyes. Light poured in through the hospital window, blinding after 2 weeks of darkness. And I pulled my hand back from the lawyer's grip, and I reached up, and I took the oxygen mask off my own face, and in front of every astonished, terrified stare in that room, I sat up, slowly, steadily, a dead woman rising at her own funeral. My eldest son's face went white. He looked as though he were seeing a ghost, and in a way he was, the ghost of the mother he'd already buried and divided, and I looked at him. My frightened boy groaned into this, and I said the words. The words I had whispered to him 1,000 times when he was small and scared of the dark. The words that had been our ritual, the promise that his mother would always wake up and always be there. I looked my eldest son dead in the eyes, and I said softly, "Mom is awake now. You don't have to worry anymore." 50 years ago, those words were a comfort. That day, in that room, they were a verdict, and every person there understood it. You don't have to worry anymore. About waiting for me to die. About the machines, about the money draining away. You don't have to worry because the waiting is over, and your mother is very much awake, and she heard everything. The day I left that hospital, the sky was an impossible, ridiculous blue. And I want to be honest with you, because you've stayed with me this whole way, and you deserve the truth, and not a fairy tale. There was no miracle that changed my children's hearts. People who plan to unplug their mother do not transform into loving sons and daughters because they got caught. I harbored no illusion that I had my children back. I had only, at last, seen them clearly. And clear sight, it turns out, is its own kind of freedom. So I did not waste my breath on arguments or curses, or the tearful confrontation they might have expected. I am too old, and I was too tired, and frankly, they were not worth the air. Instead, I let the law and the truth do the quiet work that shouting never could. I took the entire compensation for the golden land, the fortune my children never knew they were throwing away, and I used it to establish a charitable foundation in the name of my late husband, Edmund, and I placed the full legal management and benefit of that foundation in the hands of the one person who had earned it, Lan, my cast-out daughter-in-law, who had prayed to sell her blood for a poor old woman with nothing to give. She runs it now, caring for orphan children, the ones the world threw away, the way the world once threw her away. Edmund's name does good in the world, every single day, through the hands of the only person in my family who ever truly had a mother's heart. And my 2 biological children? I left them exactly what they had been so desperate to grab. I left them the old house, on paper. The very house already, illegally, sold out from under me for a pittance while I lay in a coma. They had signed a binding contract to sell property that was never legally theirs to sell to an intermediary who had every right to enforce it. So what they inherited from their patient old mother was precisely the thing they'd fought over. That dilapidated house, wrapped in a fraudulent sale contract of their own making, and attached to it an enormous debt for the illegal transaction they had rushed to complete over my breathing body. They reached for the money with both hands, and they closed their fists on the bill. I did not do that to them out of revenge. I want you to believe that, because it's true. I simply stepped out of the way and let them collide with the consequences they had built for themselves, brick by greedy brick while I wasn't supposed to be listening. Life has a justice of its own, I've found. It rarely arrives when we want it to, but it arrives. I live differently now, not in a mansion. I never wanted one. I kept a small, warm place near Lan and the children of the foundation, and I spend my evenings the way I always did, watching the sun go down. Except now there is a child or two on the porch beside me, and Lan's warm, rough hand within reach of mine. The neighbors don't call me the strange, stingy old woman anymore. But I'll tell you a secret. I miss it a little. There was a freedom in being underestimated. It let me see everything. Here is what I know now, at 68, that I did not know at 63. We spend our whole lives believing that the people who share our blood are the people who will hold our hand at the end. Sometimes that's true, and thank heaven for it. But sometimes the ones who came from your body are only waiting for it to become a body. And the one who holds your hand in the dark is someone the world told you was no longer family at all. Do not wait until the lights of an emergency room are going out to find out which is which. Look now, while you're still standing. Watch who shows up when there is nothing to gain. That person, whoever they are, whatever the world calls them, that person is your real child, your real family, your real home. Money can buy you a bed in the most expensive nursing home in the country. It cannot buy you a single warm hand to hold while you lie in it. I learned that with my eyes closed, playing dead, and it is the most alive I have ever felt. My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old, and I am not waiting on that porch for anyone to come anymore. Everyone worth waiting for is already here.